I would say my first time at the ocean was the North Sea. One of the, I wouldn't even know what's in English, like the Fries Islands. Like in northern Germany, there's these islands in the North Sea. Quite beautiful. Endless beaches. Incredibly fine sand. Not as warm as you would have in the Mediterranean. But I remember fantastic summers there and just staring in the waves and swimming in the waves just for hours and hours and hours, and always go like, oh, which is going to be the big one? And then eventually there's a really big one and you swallow a good chunk of salty water, and just being the time of my life.
The voice you just heard was that of Christoph Niemann, a German illustrator and author who has been published on the cover of The New Yorker, The New York Times Magazine, and The Atlantic Monthly. And he is the first of several guests for this episode titled Polar Bears and Strawberries. I'm Paul North, your host and founder of Meet the Ocean, and our mission is to collect the stories of seafaring folk around the world. This way, we get the broadest view of how we as humans interact with and rely upon the ocean. We are not big fans of environmental apathy, so our aim is to educate and inspire about the water planet we call home. I was working as a polar diver when I first heard Christoph was joining us aboard the National Geographic Orion. I quickly looked up his Instagram account, Abstract Sunday, and found some devilishly clever portrayals of the human experience. It was no wonder National Geographic had hired him to illustrate the journey to one of our planet's most remote destinations. It's called Svalbard, a Norwegian-governed archipelago high in the Arctic, situated halfway between the North Pole and northern Norway. And it is as harsh and as cold and as lovely as your imagination is telling you.
Hello there, my name is Christoph Niemann. I'm an illustrator and author, and right now I'm an exploring and drawing explorer and author. So for the last 8 days I've been on this boat and trying to get all these impressions and the feeling of being at the end of the world and trying to turn this into images. I was in contact with National Geographic about travel sketches. For a while I've been publishing personal travel sketches I've done over the years over Instagram, which I love as a medium. And so I was talking to the editor, and she contacted me and said, like, where do you want to go? Let's do a story together. And I'd always been fascinated with this idea of Spitsbergen, but really more as a geographic location in the middle of nowhere.
And as a visual artist, when you look out on the ocean, how do you even begin to approach that topic?
I think the greatest challenge that I have, and this is a challenge that probably every person has who travels, is that you come with so many expectations that you actually have to hold yourself back and first actually let some information to go in there before you start judging or before you start working. So the input part is sometimes very hard, especially when you come from your busy life and it's all about constantly making decisions and evaluating. So kind of getting that engine down and letting some new information in there, it's very, very difficult. But I think you need a few days of that before you can even start making sense and not only viewing everything you see through the lens of your, it's called civilian life.
You can hang a poster on your wall that tells you a smooth sea never made a skilled sailor. You can do that all you want. But until you're out there, until you know the feeling, those are just words. Christoph and I were journeying through the Barents Sea, a very unforgiving body of water north of the Arctic Circle. And we had hundreds of miles before we reached the cold edge, which is what Svalbard translates to from the Old Norse. You never know if the journey's worth it until you make it. And when we arrived, there before us was the creature that we had traveled so far to see.
You get a call from the bridge and it says, like, we have our first polar bear, and everybody rushes out with their cameras and there's a polar bear. And the incredible thing about polar bears is they are so human from our perspective. It's so easy to just project into them being funny and entertaining and sometimes a little clumsy, and then the moment they start moving and jumping from one part of ice to the other, you see they're extremely strong and agile. But it just feels like an actor in a bear suit performing for you. And of course, they probably couldn't care less about us, or maybe they would care about our food that we have on the ship, but other than that, they probably couldn't care less. But you just feel like you're in a theater play, which is fantastic. And then the bears were very curious, so they would come up to us and just like sniff around and do their things. It is like being in a theater. And most incredibly, like there's the bear, which is great, but the bear in that sea of ice. And yeah, as the expedition leader pointed out, is you look at this landscape and you think, what does the bear do here? And he said, after this, he's not going home. He's home here. It's just like little pieces of ice that stretch all the way to the horizon. Most incredibly, like this is something, again, I did not have on my radar, is that you think of this landscape of ice and you think it's still. But you see waves going through. So this whole thing keeps moving up and down, and it's like little patches of watery slush and then bricks of ice to the horizon, and that's where this is home. And that's absolutely mind-boggling.
Home can be a strange concept in a place like Svalbard, especially for outsiders like Christoph and myself. But there are people that exist there at the end of civilization, and they take great pride in how they live, mostly because it has to do with their survival. In such a brutal landscape, a person may test themselves against the harsh conditions that the Arctic provides. But Svalbard does not often hand out second chances. For those who fail the test, it becomes someone else's job to save them.
Mitt navn Erlend Folstad. Jeg ble født i Trondheim i 1963, og så ikke havet før i 1996. And I said, translated to English, my name is Erlend Folstad. I was born in inland country in the big woods in 1963, and I didn't see the ocean before 1996. And my first meeting with the ocean was at Svalbard. And I had a dream about being out on the ocean. And I started with a kayak on Svalbard as my first experience, and that was learning by doing. I bought the kayak, I bought the dry suit, all the equipment you needed on Svalbard, but I didn't buy any course to use a kayak. So I went out, learning by doing, and ended up in some very, very big waves, was turned over, and ended up swimming in the sea, in the ocean, all by myself, and had to try to swim back to the beach. I was so wise that I had swimming, the feet, big feet, so I could swim very well. But when I ended up at the beach, I had forgot to lock my dry suit, so I was very wet, and I forgot my paddle. It was still floating at the sea, and I was stuck all alone. And then I had two options. One was to sit, wait for help. Second was to lock my dry suit, swim out and get my paddle so I could get back to Longyearbyen. And I did the last thing. That was my first meeting with the ocean.
And what initially drew you to Svalbard?
Adventure. Just adventure. I was an adventurous person. I'm attracted to the Arctic. And Svalbard has, for most people in Norway, been like a very remote island that I think most Norwegians want to visit. They well know about the history, but very few had been there.
I think in general, Svalbard is a place that few consider. Many of our listeners might not even know where it is, so can you describe where we are right now?
Svalbard is one of the most remote places on Earth that easily can be accessed these days because it has the northernmost airport in the world. It's located at 78 degrees north Longyearbyen, the main capital of Svalbard. The island is in the mid between northernmost point of Norway and North Pole. I started as a police officer at the governor's office, mainly working with search and rescue. Had some terrible experience at Svalbard. I say Svalbard is the place where I have had my best moments and my worst moments in life.
Yes, I can imagine if people misconsider this place, if they underestimate it, then surely bad things can happen, even to kayakers.
And no doubt, I think I have much more respect for this environment now than I had the first summer I worked here.
So we are on the National Geographic Orion. This specific trip is beginning in Longyearbyen, exploring Svalbard, and then heading down the coast of Norway. Can you describe what your role is on board?
Yeah, I'm hired as a polar bear watchman, and my role is mainly to see that the passengers is safe when they have landings on shore in remote areas on Svalbard, because it's a great danger of polar bears here. I think polar bear is the only animal on the planet who see on human beings as food, so they will attack you for food, to have something to eat. What we say is that 1 of 100 polar bears are dangerous, but you never know when you're seeing this one. I will not consider me as an expert in seeing polar bears or understand polar bears. I think few can do that, because I've seen many polar bears, and you think you have knew something about them, and you think you can read their behavior. But in a split second, they go from being a kind polar bear to be a threat to you.
Hi, can you hear me now?
I can.
Are you looking at your decibels?
I'm looking at my decibels and they are looking at me. That laughter you're hearing is from my friend and natural history guru, Elise Lockton. She's easy to spot given how much purple she wears, but she also has a mind chock full of polar bear facts.
Hi, my name's Elise. I'm one of the naturalists aboard the National Geographic Explorer, and I have been working in this field of natural history interpretation for the last 20 years, something I discovered while I was in college and have pursued ever since. Today, around the world, we have 8 different species of bears, and it's believed that the polar bear actually evolved from the brown bear. When this divergence occurred, we're not quite sure. It could have been 500,000 years ago or longer. And it was at a point when the climate was different. Brown bears were hanging up in more northerly latitudes. Perhaps a cold climate then emerged upon them, and they were forced to adapt to a colder climate, where then seals were available. And so, a brown bear, obviously being opportunistic, started hunting seals and eventually evolved into something white and became a polar bear. This divergence did not happen long ago enough so that brown bears and polar bears cannot still reproduce and create viable young.
So you're saying behind closed doors, a brown bear and a polar bear can make, what is that combo when it's a little bit
They
white?
call it a prisley.
A prisley? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So there have been 3 documented cases, all coming from the Northwest Territories of Canada. They've all been products of polar bear hunts. When those hunters killed those bears, they quickly realized that it was not your average polar bear.
We was fishing in the winter at the north side of Svalbard. Fishing on the ice, fishing Arctic char. We had a very good catch, 25 big fishes. And in the evening we had a nice dinner. We was eating fish, drinking wine, went to sleep. The hut was very small. I wake up in the middle of the night. I heard something outside the cabin. I thought someone, my friend, was out peeing, and just turned myself around, tried to sleep again. And then the whole door was coming into the cabin, and the polar bear was standing in the room. And we had a very short moment to decide what to do. I had a gun in my hand, pointed at polar bear, but decided not to shoot, but to try to scare the polar bear. So we was hitting into the walls, shouting. The polar bear backed out, ran away. I think the polar bears is the most beautiful animals you can see on land. Just to see it walk, just to see it around you is really get some special feelings in you. They are really, really great animals. They are always walking and they're looking for food. They always know their environment and surroundings and know what's around them. They are like ghosts. They can be there in a second, and then when you feel that it's no threat, they are there threatening you. I've been very interested in the history of Svalbard. I read a lot about it, and I think what most don't know is that Lord Horatio Nelson, the big hero of Trafalgar, nearly was killed at Svalbard when he was 14 years old. He was with a ship with an admiral called Pips who tried to explore the Northeast Passage. And Horatio Nelson, at the night, he was out of the ship trying to hunt a polar bear. And his weapon misfunctioned with a polar bear very close to him. And the ship saw it, so they fired a cannon, and that scared away the polar bear. Horatio Nelson was back to the ship. The captain had a talk with him, and what he said to the captain is, "I wanted really to bring this back to my father." And the captain said, "Okay, I understand that."
Polar bears, while quite large, males can be 1,200 plus pounds, females can be about 550, 600 plus pounds. While quite large, they are very stealth in their approach to seals. So while out traveling upon the frozen sea, as polar bears are active all year round, particularly in the winter when both brown and black bears are hibernating as a product of lack of food, the polar bear's prey is actually available out on the frozen sea ice. So what they do, as the ice is forming throughout the fall and winter, the ringed seals will come up in these big cracks, known as leads, in the frozen sea ice and breathe in those big cracks. But as winter progresses and the ice becomes more concentrated and solid, they will then, with their foreflippers, make these breathing holes with their nails through 6 feet of ice. They'll have maybe 3 to 5 breathing holes in one area. They don't want to have just one hole, or else a polar bear would just be sitting, waiting for that prey to rise, to breathe. So they have 3 to 5 breathing holes, and they sort of keep the polar bears wondering where they're going to surface. But as winter progresses, with snow and snow drifts, that snow will cover the breathing holes. The ringed seals, which is their primary prey, then proceed to excavate these little caves in the snow, and then they are sort of living more protected at that time of year in the deep freeze of winter under these snow layers. And it becomes quite difficult for bears in the dead of winter. Because they are covered by snow and ice, they are not obvious. But bears have an incredible sense of smell, and it has been determined that a bear can smell a seal from half a mile away under 3 feet of snow and ice.
Svalbard has an amazing history. It was maybe one of the places on Earth that was discovered last. It was discovered in 1596. And after that, I think Svalbard has been involved in all major happenings in the world. Like first whale hunting, it was also the oil age. They needed the oil from the whales. It had all the attempt to reach to the North Pole. And then it was exploration after gold, marble, iron, everything you could find. When they found this island, they started exploration. Used a lot of money, but didn't get anything out of it. And then You had the Second World War. It was the Germans had it as a base to attack convoys to Russia. You had the Cold War, where Svalbard was in between. The Russian and NATO was both present at the island. You also had this space age, because Svalbard is the northernmost island on the world, easily accessible, where like NASA are actually reading all weather data from Svalbard. It was the first place in West Europe to get the fastest internet lines. And now they are most affected by global warming. The glaciers is decreasing a lot. We see it's almost from year to year. The sea ice that was normally made it very difficult to sail around Svalbard. Now you find it at 82 degrees north. Just 10 years ago, you couldn't sail around Svalbard at 80 degrees north. So it has a huge impact. The normal on Svalbard is that all fjords are frozen. This year has none fjords been frozen. So it's really sad to see how global warming has so huge impact in these areas.
Yes, because this will affect obviously the bears, but of course the entire ecosystem here.
No doubt. What we see now is that fish like cod that we used to catch in North Norway, now actually you can catch in Svalbard. It's also people been living both in North Norway and Svalbard say that the climate you had in North Norway is the same climate that you have now in Svalbard. I think we are giving our children a much larger challenges, or much more challenges than we self-realize. You know, if everyone is helping, it will affect. It's only I am helping, it will not affect.
You have children?
Yes, I have two. Anne Marte and Eivind. I can also tell you a bit funny story, because our children was not born here, but they had the first years here. And when we moved to the mainland, just same summer, we had to shoot a polar bear, and this polar bear was taken into Longyearbyen, and we treated in Longyearbyen the ways we have to treat polar bears who are shot. And my daughter saw all this, and then we went to mainland, moved to mainland, and she was interviewed by a local newspaper, and they asked her, "What is your favorite dishes?" And she answered, "Polar bears and strawberries."
And what was the reaction?
I think it was a lot of laughing around.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Fisher, and this is Meet the Ocean Creature Feature. I recently had the privilege of traveling to the Arctic, and while I was there, I got to see a polar bear. I was about 11 years old at the time, and I was traveling with my mother and grandmother aboard the National Geographic Orion, an expedition ship exploring Arctic Svalbard. I remember the exact moment when I saw my first ice bear pretty well, but I still had to use one of National Geographic's archived daily expedition reports, or DERs, to piece together everything that happened. Sometimes when something so epically magical occurs, the mundane details can be a bit tough to recall. Anyway, it was July 12th, 2016, and we had just visited Resibukta. Sorry if I butchered the pronunciation there. Anyway, before arriving at Resibukta, we had been stuck on the Orion for about 2 days at sea, so it was quite the relief to set foot on land once again. Resibukta was a flat, marshy, plain island covered in squishy moss and tiny white flowers. Excitingly, we found quite a few reindeer, which to a child who had just seen Frozen was the second best thing that happened that day. The first best thing came later. We stayed at Resibukta until the afternoon and set out to sea again at night. We arrived at the coastline of an island, and while we were eating dinner, one of the boat's crew spotted a polar bear a couple miles away on the shore. As expected, the Orion began to turn with undeniable purpose, and a couple curious guests, including me and my family, went to the bridge of the ship, or the place where the captain and the working crew are, to see what was going on. When we reached the bridge, we were excited to learn that a bear had been spotted. Though we were still pretty far away from the polar bear, we were growing closer and closer. The bear almost looked like a ghost against the rainy, gray-green backdrop of the tundra. I remember that, even though there was a cold wind biting at my face, which I obviously hadn't had time to properly affix with warm clothes, I was far too excited to be freezing. Finally, we got as close to the bear as we could, and it was amazing. Just watching the bear walk around was impossible to look away from. Scary, but super cool. The polar bear was covered in stains of brown and black, probably from mud or dirt, and the rest of its fur was very pale yellow. Its eyes were completely black, and they reflected the faint light of many passengers' flashing cameras. Eventually, the polar bear began digging around in the tundra, hoping to find food. Luckily, that food wouldn't be me, or any of my fellow passengers, since we were separated from the bear by a thick metal wall. No matter what, I will never forget seeing that polar bear, as well as the ones I saw afterwards. That day, I also decided on a new favorite animal, the ice bear, although I hear there are some animals in Antarctica that are pretty cool too.
So when you have white fur, like polar bears or Arctic hares in the winter, Arctic fox, ptarmigan, basically when you have hair of color, your hair shaft is full of melanin, which is the pigment that gives our hair color. But in the absence of melanin, your hair shaft is hollow. And so, in theory, having a hollow hair shaft should act as a form of insulation because the heat from the core of the body should radiate up through that hollow shaft and help to keep you warm. So yes, their fur is hollow.
And that hollowness must help them remain more buoyant as well.
And when you see a polar bear swimming in the water, it is quite remarkable how much of their backside is above the surface of the water. Something that always impresses me, their buoyancy.
As a diver, should I encounter one in the water, I would hope that it remains buoyant and that I have enough air in my tank to not be buoyant at that time.
I think one of the great testaments to buoyancy is there was a bear off the Beaufort Sea off of Alaska a few years ago. That bear, because of the loss of sea ice, was forced to swim 426 miles. No stopping, no islands, no ice in between. That bear had a cub with it. Unfortunately, the cub did not make it, but she made it 420 plus miles in a period of 9 days. So I think that alone is testament to their buoyancy that comes through hollow fur and also fat.
Svalbard has been the last frontier for many. It's a place where regulated society meets the frontier, and many people want to just have the opportunities to go into the frontier and to be in an area where regulation don't reach you, where you are on your own. You know that if something happened with you when you're traveling on this island, no one can help you. You're out on your own. If you're doing mistakes, it's not only to call 911. You just have to handle it yourself. And I think it's a kind of that is affecting us a lot, that we really want to be in an area where we can be really outside the regulated world.
Well, my idea of especially travel is that, again, we come into these situations with a lot of preconceived notions of, what it would be like to travel, to be in an exotic place that's, on the other hand, familiar. And in a way, we go with a plan to create memories. And ultimately, that's the idea of travel. It's like, on the one hand, it's being there, but also it's kind of coming back and having a story to tell, visuals in your camera. And I just love when kind of like the reality and our expectations when they collide in unexpected ways. And of course, there's the craziness of being in a place where 500 years people died if they just stayed out for 10 minutes too long, and now we're sitting here happily in the warmth with what seems like 8 meals a day, and then having this great nature out there. But sometimes there's profound emotions that can be had when you're so far out there, when you just realize you're so far away from all this stuff. I mean, sadly, this week, the moment the internet was working again, which it didn't for a few days, you very harshly reminded of all the stuff that's going on in the world. And it's not so much that this puts it in perspective, this doesn't make it any better, but I think it's still interesting to see yourself being taken out of all of this. And I don't know what a conclusion is that might take another half year to go back. But all these thoughts, sometimes it's very helpful to get away, and then it's easier to observe when you're out of your usual habitat.
As humans, we don't really have a usual habitat, at least not anymore. Remarkably, we have learned to live in every climate on our planet, but not every species has that option. Some are specialized hunters like polar bears, who have learned to survive in some of the harshest conditions nature offers. But now they are being forced to develop new strategies, some as desperate as eating grass, searching for bird eggs, like I witnessed in July of 2016. Climate change is not a comfortable topic. The only thing of comfort is that we will find a solution. So be optimistic, but be educated, and most of all, be honest. And if you would like a little homework about the relationship between the sun and sea ice, look up albedo. That's ALBEDO. Meet the Ocean was formed to gather these stories and share them with you, because the conversation is never over, and education leads to conservation.
No doubt.
Hei! Dette er Marte Folstad, datter av Erlend Folstad, og mitt favorittkjøddyr er blåhval. Hello! I'm the daughter of Erlend Folstad, and my favorite ocean animal is the blue whale. Last time I was in Svalbard, I saw the blue whale, and I thought it looked so stunning and beautiful. So, when I got down to the mainland, I went to the museum to see and learn about how the blue whale lives. Meet the Ocean would like to thank artist Christoph Newman, polar bear watchman Erlend Folstad, and naturalist Elise Lachten for sharing their stories. This episode was edited by Andrew Gettings, with Foley by Kelsey Anderson and original music by Vin Gast. And a special thanks to Charlotte Fisher and producer Eric Vermeister and Katie Steinberg. Check out meettheocean.org for our blog, photos and videos and ways to contribute to our organization. In Norwegian, ser deg neste gang! See you next time!